Right. So before we start, I have one quick request from all of you. I'd like you to look at me and based on what you see, make as many assumptions as possible about me. Let's start with the obvious. I'm a woman. I'm Arab. I'm Egyptian. I'm Muslim. And I live in Dubai. How many assumptions could you make? Or rather, how many common assumptions did you make with the people around you? Did you think I have an attitude? I get angry too easily. Or that I'm a bad driver? That I'm filthy rich? Or that in some countries you might even think I'm dangerous? Well, the truth is, of all these assumptions, the only one that's actually correct is that I'm a bad driver. But that's only because I don't have a license yet, so you can ignore that. What I want to know is, how come we as a society have associated one characteristic with an entire group of people without actually interacting with them? What we're doing, all this associating stuff, it's stereotyping. So how did it start? Are we racist? Why? Let's look into how everything began. How many of you here played the game Japanese Whisper before? Or Chinese telephone? Well, for those of you that haven't, it's a game where as children, we sat in a circle and I, for example, whispered a sentence to a person on my right. And that person said the sentence to a person on their right. And it went along the circle until the person on my left said that sentence out loud. And almost always that sentence is completely different from what I initially said. And it's hilarious. We laugh about it, we find it funny, we do it again and again. That is exactly how stereotypes form. And to look into a little bit further, there's a study done by Simon Kirby in 2008, which compared how stereotypes form with how languages form. That study involved getting a group of volunteers and teaching one of the volunteers a whole new language. They brought foreign objects to them and gave them new names. For example, this is called tug. Now, the scientists asked that one volunteer to teach another volunteer that same language, and have that volunteer teach it to another, and so on down a communication chain. And along the chain, the scientists introduced foreign unseen objects by the first volunteer that had similar features to objects seen by the first volunteer. For example, this object. Can you guess what this object was also referred to as? It was called tug. And by the end of the chain, all of these objects were called tug, when in fact, the only actual tug in there is the one on the top right. What you can see is that the volunteers have all associated one common trait with all these objects based on one observable feature. In our modern day, that would be our skin tone, our hair color, whether or not we cover our hair, our gender, and so on. So now we know that's how they formed. Why do stereotypes still exist? Why haven't we eliminated them? According to evolutionary biology and cultural evolution, if a certain trait harms the human race, it would be eliminated from existence down the evolutionary tract. So technically speaking, if stereotypes harmed us, they won't exist. But they do exist, and have been existing for the past hundreds and hundreds of years. So, are they benefiting us in a way? As humans, we categorize everything. We categorize non-social objects, like vehicles, into cars and trains and airplanes and so on. We categorize social objects, like the animal kingdom. We categorize land, we categorize houses, and similarly, we categorize ourselves based on our gender, on our age, our ethnicity, our religion, and so on. And the reason we do this is to have an idea about the people we're going to be interacting with. So let's say you're presenting something to a group of 30-year-olds. Would you present the exact same thing to a group of 5-year-olds? Similarly, if you were talking to a group of elderly people, you would unconsciously raise your voice because you know that elderly people have lower hearing capabilities. So, technically speaking, stereotypes should aid us. They act as energy-saving devices. But everybody here knows that stereotypes tend to inflict more harm than good on us. So how come? What stereotypes are, essentially speaking, is an idea that is used to describe a particular type of person or thing. But that's not what's happening today. Usually it's all negative descriptions. A common social psychology experiment to explain this involves a classroom of students. So the classroom of students are asked to split themselves into two groups, completely random. And then one group is given something to distinguish it from the other group. Let's say this group wears hats and this group doesn't. The two groups are then asked to differentiate between each other. It starts off very easy. They're wearing hats, they're not. Then they're asked to list down further differences. And that's when things get a little rough. Well, maybe they're a bit too full of themselves. Well, they're over smart. Well, they're narcissists. Fine, they're overconfident. And next thing you know, there is this unforeseen conflict that developed between both groups that was essentially non-existent before the separation. And as each group feels like their self-esteem is being attacked, they start attacking the other group, be it verbally, physically, or mentally, to increase their self-worth and self-esteem. Now, for the sake of this experiment, let's say the groups leave the classroom. And someone from the non-hat-wearing group sees a complete stranger wearing a cool hat on the street. Would their first thought be, that's a cool hat, or would it be, that's a narcissist? That's how prejudicial thoughts develop. And soon enough, people start acting on these thoughts. Their thoughts start affecting their attitude. Next thing you know, we're not hiring hat wearers. How come? Because they're narcissists. Why would you say so? They're wearing hats. Do you see how absurd that sounds? Yet, it happens almost every day in our society. And yes, I know, you might say that it has eased off a bit. Discrimination did supposedly ease off. People start protesting, they speak out more, people are being heard, and actions are being taken. But are people actually changing their thoughts? Or are they only doing it so they're not attacked by other people? How do you know if someone is actually as nice as they claim to be? Well, there were two ways to find this out. And they're the ways about researching stereotypes. So there's the old method, which involved getting volunteers and asking them to describe or list down their thoughts about a certain discriminated group. And you can see why this is ineffective, because what the volunteers usually did is that their answers contradicted their thoughts because they said what they believed the scientist wants to hear, but not what they actually thought. The newer way, however, came out with the development of technology. It's known as the implicit association test, or the IAT. Now, this test measures the speed of how quickly you're willing to categorize a certain group with positive features and negative features. And if you categorize that group more with negative features in a quicker way than with positive features, then you do have some unconscious bias. And I'd recommend you all to give it a shot because it shocked me, it shocked my friends, and it might shock you. Because you might think you're nice, you might think you're not racist, but you probably most likely are. And this test was pretty much revolutionary to the whole researching on stereotypes. And one of the scientists who worked on it, called Jack DeVito, he said that 20 years ago, we hypothesized that people claimed they did not have prejudicial thoughts, but in fact actually had unconscious negative thoughts and bias. Whereas the IAT was like theorizing about the existence of a virus, but then actually seeing it under a microscope. So let's go back to how our little experiment with hat wearers and non-hat wearers. We know that discrimination plays a huge impact on how people get hired. That nowadays people might not get hired because of their race or their ethnicity or their gender and so on. And it might be unconsciously. To prove that, in 1970, people noticed that less than 10% of the new hired people for American orchestras were female, and less than 20% of the orchestras were women. So to see if unconscious bias had an impact on all this, they put a sheet between the judges and the auditioners. And 20 years later, that number doubled from 20% to 40%. Even though the judges claimed that they were not trying to be biased, they were unconsciously being biased. So now, large industries are trying to overcome this idea by hiding or no longer asking for gender when people are being employed and hiding their names when looking at their resumes. But how can you as a person improve? Well, first off, take the IAT test. Acknowledge your bias. It's okay. Humans make mistakes, so don't feel guilty about it, as long as you're planning on actually improving yourself. Now, if you plan on knowing about it and moving on with your life and still being racist or sexist or whatever it is, then that's your problem and you should probably reevaluate yourself. Second off, pay attention to how you act. Let's say you're biased against Muslims. You're in a bus and a Muslim person walks in. You clench your jaws, you hold your bag, and you hold on to your child. You do this all unconsciously. So you realize your actions, reverse them. Unclench your jaws, let go of how attached you were to everything around you, and smile at the person walking in. And then have more intergroup contact. Be with a more diverse group of students. Have more diverse colleagues at work. Have more diverse friends, because that way they learn more about you, and of course you learn more about them. And then hopefully, your thoughts might just become a little bit better. And finally, stop relying on your guts. Look into concrete facts. In our society, we are exposed to propaganda on a daily basis. We're told this is good and this is bad without any actual facts or solid evidence. Do your research, get your facts straight, and based on what you find, determine whether or not, or determine how you're supposed to act towards a specific group. But stop relying on your guts. And before you start judging other people for being rude or discriminative or whatever it may be, look at yourself first. Make sure you're not a hypocrite yourself. Work on yourself, improve your bias, improve your way of thought, and then, and only then, start helping others to improve. Thank you.